Everyone called my teacher a criminal and a predator, but he was the only one who helped me. I started digging into why they really wanted him gone. What I found sent half the PTA to federal prison. The first day of senior year, we got a new history teacher named Mr. Williams. As soon as he walked into class, my friend Madison whispered, he went to prison for theft. I had never seen the entire school react so harshly to a stranger before. That evening, the parent-teacher meeting was packed with angry eyes and accusations. The principal was forced to admit that Mr. Williams did have a criminal record, but was hired on an emergency license due to a teacher shortage. Even though he explained the reasoning, a wave of outrage had already started spreading through the community. The next day, Madison grabbed my arm at our locker and muttered, "My mom said the PTA is holding an emergency meeting to get him fired." I overheard parents telling their kids not to take his class seriously, to drive him out. The atmosphere at school grew heavy, like a dangerous criminal was lurking in the halls. I saw Mr. Williams trying to chat with students, only to be met with disgusted stares and whispered rumors. Whenever he walked into the teacher's lounge, the room went silent, like something revolting had just entered. Miss Peterson even warned us to lock up our bags if we left them in his classroom. Despite the cold shoulders, Mr. Williams brought in brand new supplies he'd bought with his own money and offered after-school tutoring that no one attended. He talked about his past mistakes in a quiet, sad voice, but there was a determined light in his eyes, like he was trying to make things right. I started wondering, were the rumors even true, or was something being hidden? For the next month, students called him Mr. Jailbird whenever he entered the room. They joked, asking if he taught stealing the same way he taught history, and burst out laughing. Every school day was like a mental beatdown for him. The teacher's lounge fell silent when he walked in, as if he didn't exist. Other teachers didn't bother telling him when rooms or meetings changed. He just silently took notes, like he was used to this kind of brutal isolation. He was banned from field trips for insurance reasons. Parents filmed him standing by the school gate and labeled the footage, "Criminal near your children." Mrs. Whitmore, the PTA president, even set up a tent right outside his room to monitor him. Even though the whole system turned its back on him, Mr. Williams still ran free SAT prep classes every afternoon. No one showed up, but he kept printing materials and sat waiting alone in the dark classroom until 7 p.m. I couldn't understand why he tried so hard, but it made me start to care. He bought school supplies with his own money, wrote recommendation letters by hand, line by line. I saw him quietly glue his busted shoes back together and rotate through 4 worn-out shirts. His dedication made me ashamed of staying silent and going along with the crowd. I had spent all year saving $60 to take the SAT, the one shot I had at escaping my home life. The night before the exam, my stepfather came home drunk, smashed my phone, and grabbed the car keys. He screamed, "You think you're better than us?" and threw me into hopelessness. I walked 3 miles in the dark to the school, hoping to find a bus route on the library computers. But every door was locked. There was no way to reach the test center, which was 45 minutes away. I collapsed on the steps crying, feeling like my entire youth was slipping away. Mr. Williams' old car pulled up to the school and he froze when he saw me. His eyes darted to the security cameras and windows. Then he made a decision. Get in. He texted and left a voicemail for the principal, clearly stating the reason. Emergency student support for SAT. He waited the entire morning in the test center parking lot, just to drive me back home afterward. Some parents took photos of him standing by his car. I didn't know that his act of kindness would cost him dearly. On Monday, I was called to the office with a school security officer. "There's a report saying you were alone with Mr. Williams on Saturday morning," they said. Before I could say anything, they handed me a statement and told me to sign it. They pressed, "Did he contact you first? Was it prearranged?" Officer Daniels glanced at me and said coldly, "Many victims try to protect their abuser." I felt myself drowning in a wave of suspicion and fear. Madison started spreading rumors that I was involved with the ex-con teacher. The school counselor told me I should retake the SAT. This score might raise questions. My reputation collapsed in one afternoon and never recovered. Mr. Williams was immediately suspended and forced to hand over all school-issued equipment. His car was vandalized after a PTA emergency meeting, spray-painted with the word "Predator." His landlord gave him 30 days to move out. He was put on unpaid leave for 2 months while under investigation. People started calling me the bait whenever I walked the halls. The college counselor advised me to include an explanation of the scandal in my applications. I knew Mr. Williams wouldn't be coming back to school, so I tracked down the address he once mentioned. When I called, his wife, Karen Ripley, initially thought I was a parent and shouted angrily. But once she learned I was the student he had helped, her voice cracked. "He's at the food bank right now." I went to the food bank and saw Mr. Williams stacking food boxes with trembling hands. He looked thinner than before, his eyes vacant, until he saw me. I walked closer, and for the first time since the scandal, he gave a real smile. I told him I scored a 1,480 on the SAT and had been nominated for a scholarship. His eyes welled up and his voice cracked. "Kid, you did it." Then he told me why he had been arrested and why he chose to accept prison time. He used to work at a nonprofit that supported homeless veterans. One Christmas, the organization's director vanished with 400. In desperation, Mr. Williams used the company card to pay rent for 12 families and was charged with theft. He chose to serve 2 years in prison rather than risk 10 if he went to trial. I held handwritten thank you letters from the veterans' families. "You saved us from the streets when no one else cared," one of them read. I walked into the principal's office, my heart pounding but hands steady. I told him the full story, from the nonprofit to that fateful Christmas. When I mentioned the name of the organization, his hands started shaking like he'd touched a live wire. The principal shot up from his chair, sending it crashing into the wall behind him. His face went pale, eyes darting to the door like he was expecting someone to barge in. "There are things better left alone," he mumbled, practically pushing me out of the room. The whole day, my mind reeled with the principal's strange reaction. That night, I called Karen Ripley from a payphone at the grocery store. Her voice cracked when she heard my name, then she burst into tears and asked to meet at the public library. The next morning, just as I reached the school parking lot, Madison suddenly blocked my path. She grabbed my arm so hard her nails dug into my coat, her eyes wild with panic. "How long are you going to defend a criminal?" she hissed, not with concern, but threat. I pulled my arm free and drove to the library as promised. Karen Ripley was sitting in the history section, clutching a yellow folder to her chest. She whispered, "Something's wrong." He suspected it even before the suspension. Mr. Williams had told her that something was off with the school's financial records. He always avoided the topic when she pressed, only saying, "Someone's collecting dirt as insurance." Before leaving, she handed me the folder and quickly walked away, like she was afraid someone was watching. I opened the folder. Inside were photocopies of budget reports and Mr. Williams' handwritten notes. He'd circled suspicious figures, scribbled question marks and exclamation points beside them. It was clear he had seen something, and it might have gotten him into trouble. I snuck back into his old classroom after the janitor had just left. I rifled through drawers, slid my hand under the desk, and found a tiny black USB stick. It was taped under the desk with clear tape, like it had been carefully hidden from prying eyes. I went home, locked the door, and plugged the USB into my laptop with shaking hands. Dozens of spreadsheets popped up, financial data from school fundraisers. Plenty of money came in, but the bank deposits were way lower, too often to be a coincidence. Just a few $100s at a time, but over 2 years more than 50 had vanished. Spring fundraisers, Christmas parties, bake sales, all showed signs of being skimmed. Someone had been stealing from the very donations made by parents and students. The next morning, I printed the evidence and arrived at school early to double-check the records. To my surprise, Vice Principal Mr. Grayson was already there, eyes locked on the papers in my hand. He stared without blinking, then turned away and immediately made a call. I clearly heard him whisper, "The girl knows. He kept the files." That night, my mom got an anonymous call saying I showed signs of mental instability. They suggested she have me evaluated within the week, like I was a danger to myself. I tried telling her the truth about the files and the proof, but she wouldn't listen. "I'm taking you to get checked. You're obsessed with a criminal. This isn't normal." That's when I realized they weren't just trying to destroy Mr. Williams. They were coming for me too. I had already backed up the data before Mr. Grayson could get the USB. The proof lived in my email, every line, every spreadsheet. Even if they tried to silence me, I still held the key to the truth. That night, Karen Ripley called, her voice shaking with fear. Someone had broken into her family's storage unit. Her husband's documents were gone, but all the valuables were untouched. Meanwhile, Madison kept posting photos from old school events all over social media. An old photo popped up, Madison's mother sitting at the fundraising cash table. The caption read, "My mom, last year's PTA treasurer," and my stomach twisted. I started combing through every picture, every public record from the past 2 years of school fundraisers. Madison's mom, Mrs. Whitmore, appeared in almost every photo, always stationed at the money table. Each tiny clue pulled me deeper into a terrifying maze. Less than a week later, I heard Mrs. Whitmore make a public statement. "There's a mentally unstable student spreading lies about the school's finances." She didn't name me, but everyone knew. And the way she said finances was too specific. How would she know unless someone told her? Soon after, the school counselor pulled me aside, face full of worry. She kept glancing at the cameras, whispering, "Some battles aren't worth winning." That's when I realized people knew, just no one dared speak up. I tried once more to meet with the principal, handing over printed documents showing the financial discrepancies. He didn't even glance at them. He just repeated, "These are private materials. You're harassing staff." But I saw it, the same raw fear in his eyes as before. As I walked home, an anonymous text flashed on my phone. It listed every DUI arrest my stepfather had, along with old prescriptions my mom had abused. Not a direct threat, but a warning, "Stop, or all your secrets will be exposed." I knew I couldn't back down, not after what they'd done to Mr. Williams. I started tracking down old witnesses, anyone who might have seen something. And then I remembered Ms. Claire Jenkins, the former school accountant who suddenly quit last year. I found Claire working at a small accounting firm across town. When she saw me, she immediately tried to close the door, eyes wide with fear. All she said was, "Some people have long memories, and expensive lawyers." I didn't give up. I followed Claire to a weekend coffee shop where she often sat alone. This time, when she saw me, she didn't run. She quietly motioned for me to sit. That's when I knew she was about to tell me what no one else would. Her voice trembled as she revealed. The PTA president and vice principal had been cooking the books for years. They created fake vendor accounts, inflated invoices, and fake services to siphon off funds. She slid a USB drive across the table. I backed it all up, in case this day ever came. I opened it and found detailed financial files, sender names, recipient accounts, amounts. Each line was theft. There were even emails between Mrs. Whitmore and her husband's accounting firm, discussing how to optimize costs. The total sum stolen? Over. 200. This wasn't petty embezzlement anymore, it was a professional scheme. The next day, Mrs. Whitmore filed a complaint accusing me of threatening and stalking her family. A police officer showed up at my house, looking almost apologetic as he handed me a temporary restraining order. He quietly said, "I've seen orders like this before, usually when someone's about to blow something wide open." I stood there, hands shaking, staring at the bold letters, "Suspected behavioral disturbance." It was exactly what they did to Mr. Williams. First destroy his name, then destroy the person. Now I was becoming the perfect replica of their old strategy. The only difference? I'd seen their playbook and knew how to fight back. I spent the whole afternoon organizing the evidence into a clear timeline. Every transaction, every email, every threat, marked, encrypted, and archived. Out of nowhere, Officer Daniels, the same one who had investigated Mr. Williams, showed up after school. Wearing plain clothes, he quietly gave me advice on how to report financial fraud to federal authorities. He didn't say much, but his eyes made it clear. He was on my side. That night, I discovered my email account had been accessed from an unknown device. Some critical files had been deleted, but I had backups on 3 USB drives, hidden in separate places. This breach confirmed it. They knew what I had was real, and they were scared. The next morning, Mr. Grayson called me into his office, pretending to be calm. He accused me of disrupting the academic environment with my obsessive delusions. But he slipped, mentioning the nonprofit scandal, something I'd never told him. If he knew, that meant they'd been digging into Mr. Williams' past from the very beginning. And maybe, they'd hired him on purpose, as a scapegoat, someone to sacrifice when things went south. This wasn't just about embezzlement. It was a setup, a long game to destroy the one good man who had seen too much. During lunch, the former maintenance worker Carl Simmons stopped by my table, pretending to collect trash. He whispered, "I once saw them meeting late at the main office. No one's supposed to be there at that hour." If his access card logs matched the time, it would be irrefutable physical evidence. That night, my mom burst into my room, holding a letter from the district's Department of Education. They had officially requested that I undergo a psychological evaluation, citing concerns about public safety. Her eyes no longer burned with anger, but with a suffocating, deep fear. The evaluation took place in a cold, sterile office, filled with leading questions. Do you often think about a particular teacher? Do you believe there's a financial conspiracy at your school? I knew every word I said could determine whether or not I'd keep my freedom. I answered carefully, sticking only to what I could prove with documentation. I emphasized that I cared about justice, and about students being robbed of resources from the stolen funds. I wasn't paranoid. I was just the only one still willing to speak the truth. That weekend, Karen called me in tears. Mr. Williams had just received a death threat. Someone messaged him. "You know what happens to people who don't stay quiet." She begged me, "Don't get in deeper, they could hurt you too." On Monday morning, Carl handed me his access log. 3 instances of unauthorized entry at night. Both Mrs. Whitmore and Mr. Grayson's names appeared in the system during hours they had claimed to be at a district meeting. I finally had physical proof they were in the building when they weren't supposed to be. Later that day, the school counselor pulled me into the hallway again. Her hands were shaking as she held out a piece of paper. On the back was a handwritten address. No explanation. I looked at her one last time and realized she had just risked her entire career to pass me this clue. I went to the address after school, an old, quiet apartment complex. Claire Jenkins, the former school accountant, opened the door, suitcase already packed. "I'm moving out of state," she said, "but there's one last thing you should have." She handed me another USB drive, this one filled with emails between Mrs. Whitmore and her husband's accounting firm. The messages discussed adjusting the books and alternative revenue streams from restricted funds. There was no more doubt. This was an organized money laundering scheme. The next morning, I received a court update. The restraining order now extended to Mrs. Whitmore's home, workplace, and children. The tone was crystal clear. If I violated it, I'd be arrested. They were shutting every door, making sure I had no escape. Officer Daniels and I met at a diner outside school grounds to avoid surveillance. He told me, "Once you pass 200, the feds will open a case automatically, especially if it crosses state lines." He couldn't act officially, but he showed me how to preserve evidence through the correct legal channels. The following day, parents began receiving automated calls from the PTA, accusing me of being a mentally unstable threat to the school. The rumors reached my mom's workplace, and her coworkers began treating her with suspicion. I realized they didn't need evidence, just fear and isolation. In the bathroom, I found Madison sobbing, gripping her phone tightly. When I approached, she muttered, "My mom promised to pay for college. Now I know where that money came from." She wasn't angry anymore, just hollow, with the look of someone finally seeing the truth. That Friday afternoon, as I was leaving the parking lot, Mr. Grayson stopped me, wearing a strained smile. He held out a draft of a college recommendation letter, speaking with forced cheer. "If you're smart about this, things could work out nicely." I knew immediately it wasn't help. It was a bribe disguised as kindness, a final attempt to buy my silence. I declined and walked away, but heard him slip. "District inspectors are already asking questions. We're running out of time." Even as he tried to intimidate me, that slip gave me hope. They were losing control. The higher-ups had started investigating, and they were scared of what was coming. That weekend, I spent hours reconstructing a complete timeline of the entire case. Every dollar, every message, every threat, connected and labeled with precision. This was no longer just a feeling. It was a clear, evidence-based indictment. Then, on Monday, I got a news alert from an international outlet. The director of the nonprofit from years ago, the one Mr. Williams worked for, had been arrested in Germany. Even more important, the police had found connections between him and an accountant from my school district. The thread from the past was starting to tighten around the present circle of corruption. That evening, Karen called me in a hurried voice, saying Mr. Williams had made an extra copy of evidence and hidden it somewhere. She didn't say where, just promised to hand it over when it was safe. But her voice wasn't shaking anymore. It was steady, with the resolve of a mother who had lost all faith in the old idea of justice. On Wednesday, the school held a PTA meeting to discuss the shortage of educational supplies despite multiple fundraising events. Mrs. Whitmore stood to speak, visibly flustered, as parent after parent raised their hands to ask, "Where did the money go?" For the first time, her usual confidence began to crack, publicly. After the meeting, Officer Daniels gently tapped my shoulder, his eyes heavy. "They've started moving, but they need the original source files." I nodded, opened my backpack, and handed him the USB drive containing the complete trail of transactions and emails. We weren't alone anymore. Now the legal system was finally on our side. 2 days later, an urgent message from the parent group chat started spreading. "Whitmore is losing it." She was screaming in the school courtyard, accusing multiple parents of betrayal and launching wild counter-accusations. Her perfect image had finally shattered in front of everyone. That afternoon, I received a report from the Financial Oversight Board. Mrs. Whitmore's husband had received money directly from that old nonprofit organization. Not only had he laundered money through the school, but he was also tied to the missing 400 from years ago. Mr. Williams had gotten too close to the truth, so they chose to destroy him. By Friday, students at school were sharing my essay on social media, The Forgotten Teacher. For the first time in months, Mr. Williams' name wasn't followed by gossip, but by gratitude. The light of truth was starting to slip through the cracks they'd worked so hard to seal. On Monday, the emergency school board meeting was packed wall to wall. 2 federal agents presented their preliminary findings, measured but heavy with weight. The faces of the PTA members gradually shifted from confident to visibly shaken. Investigators confirmed, Mr. Williams had been quietly cooperating with them from the start. He had flagged a network of embezzlement stretching across multiple states. The man once falsely accused had now become a key witness in a federal case. Mrs. Whitmore stormed into the room, pointing fingers and screaming about a conspiracy to ruin her family's name. All her polished elegance was gone, replaced by the fury of someone desperately clinging to control. But this time, the crowd wasn't on her side anymore. Her husband's records, chief accountant at a private firm, showed clear links to that nonprofit scandal. His company had received payments from fake service contracts approved by the school. Their web of lies had finally unraveled under the light of the law. I froze as the full strategy hit me. They had hired Mr. Williams because his criminal past made him the perfect scapegoat. If anything surfaced, he'd take the fall. No one would believe a word he said. But they didn't count on his past teaching him how to document everything. They kept attacking. Mrs. Whitmore's lawyer released a public statement claiming I was a manipulated teen led by a criminal teacher. They tried to frame me as a paranoid kid battling forces she didn't understand. But this time, people didn't buy it. The evidence spoke for itself. Carl Simmons went public, telling the press what he saw during those unauthorized late-night visits to the main office. I saw them counting cash, wrapping bills, right in the place where we used to work for the students. His simple testimony cut through all of their polished excuses. The district's IT department provided proof that files had been illegally deleted from internal accounts. Fortunately, backup copies had been preserved. Every missing dollar now had a digital footprint. The stolen funds were no longer invisible. That weekend, the community gathered outside the school, demanding a full accounting of their donations. People who once called me the unstable girl now stood beside me, holding signs for justice. The anger had shifted, no longer aimed at the victims, but at the real perpetrators. At the next emergency meeting, the school board voted unanimously to cooperate fully with federal agents and to audit the entire system. No more gray areas, no more immunity. Every file would be reopened. A new chapter was beginning, but the road ahead still needed more brave people to walk it. On Monday morning, I received an email from 2 federal agents requesting a meeting. They wanted everything, every document related to the cross-state transactions and shadowy cash flows. The case had officially outgrown the school district. It was now a federal crime. The very next day, Mrs. Whitmore went on local television, accusing me of being coached to fabricate evidence. Her husband held a press conference, calling his accounting firm the most trustworthy in the state. But their aggression no longer held power, not when the evidence was public. I happened to catch Mr. Grayson and Mrs. Whitmore arguing furiously behind the school parking lot. Her voice rang out clearly, "You promised this would stay buried." Under legal pressure, their alliance was starting to fracture. Carl Simmons testified before the grand jury, presenting his late-night access logs and describing the secret meetings. No fancy wording, just what he saw when he saw it. That honesty cut deeper than any lawyer's defense could. The IT department kept digging and discovered deletion logs that matched the exact timing of the complaint filed against me. Someone had tried to erase evidence right before fabricating a mental health profile to discredit me. What was meant to be a smokescreen had now become proof of intent. Parents who once doubted me began sending letters of apology and thanks. A volunteer group formed to help recover the stolen fundraiser money. I realized that sometimes, justice doesn't come from courtrooms, it comes from restored trust. Mr. Williams was officially exonerated. He received full restitution and a formal public apology. The board's letter read, "We failed to protect a man who deserved to be believed." He returned to the classroom, not as a suspect, but as a quiet hero. As I prepared my final witness statement for the upcoming trial, Mr. Williams sent me a handwritten letter. "You did what an entire system was too afraid to do, tell the truth." I cried, but not from pain. For the first time, I felt free from guilt. The verdict came down. Mrs. Whitmore was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Her husband received 12, convicted of money laundering and conspiracy. Mr. Grayson got a lighter sentence for testifying, but his career in education was over. The once untouchable were now behind the defendant's bench. When I walked off school grounds for the last time, the afternoon sun lit the playground in peace. No more whispered rumors, no more eyes watching from behind corners. Only stillness, a school slowly healing after the storm. In the federal hearing, I stood before dozens and swore to tell the truth. I walked them through every detail, every document, every moment I had lived through as an insider. I wasn't trembling anymore. I spoke not as a victim, but as a witness to history. The defense lawyers tried to twist my words, implying I was a manipulated teen. They brought up mental health reports, suggesting I was driven by adolescent emotion. I looked them in the eye and replied, "Truth doesn't require age to recognize." Mr. Williams testified after me, bringing his old dusty notebooks. He explained how he discovered financial discrepancies while reviewing textbook purchase records. His meticulous note-taking, once mocked as obsessive, had become the very weapon that dismantled corruption. Karen Ripley shared how they had been harassed, midnight threats, anonymous calls, silent stares. Her family was isolated. Her son had to transfer schools. Her husband was called a fraud. All because they refused to stay silent. And now, she wasn't staying silent either. Carl Simmons walked into court in his worn janitor's uniform, holding a stack of papers. He recounted the night he saw them counting cash in the admin office, as if recalling just another work shift. It was the plainness of his words that made the courtroom fall silent. Mr. Grayson took the stand, pale and shaking, finally admitting the embezzlement scheme. He confessed that Mrs. Whitmore had helped him pay off gambling debts in exchange for silence. The truth was finally said, by the man who once vowed to protect students. Then came the hardest decision I faced. Some of the evidence showed that certain parents had indirectly benefited from the scheme. If I turned it all in, some families might get swept into legal trouble. I submitted the full report but added a note. Please distinguish between those who were exploited and those who exploited others. The prosecutor ended her argument with a single sentence that silenced the courtroom. We're not just prosecuting criminals, we're clearing the names of those wrongfully called criminals. I saw Mr. Williams bow his head, tears streaming down a face that did not tremble. The verdict came after 2 days of deliberation. All primary defendants received the maximum sentence allowed by law. The restitution didn't cover everything, but it was enough to begin rebuilding. I sat quietly through the final hearing, feeling like a chapter of my life had just been sealed with the strike of a gavel. The school installed an automated auditing system. The entire PTA was replaced through transparent elections. A scholarship fund was created in honor of Karen Ripley, the Ripley Foundation, for students who had been pushed aside. The wounds were still there, but for the first time, we were healing through trust. Graduation day arrived. I wore my gown and walked across the stage with clarity in my eyes. Down below, Mr. Williams stood silently, hand over heart as I looked his way. No words were needed. Our eyes said it all. We won. Mr. Williams returned to teaching, welcomed warmly by a new generation of students. His classroom didn't just teach history, it taught courage, truth, and honor. A man once labeled a criminal had become a symbol of redemption in education. I visited the old school one last time before heading off to college. The front gate, once intimidating, now looked strangely peaceful. It had once been a battlefield. Now, it was where I left behind the memories of growing up. My mom, the same woman who once doubted and feared, now packed meals for my dorm with her own hands. We hugged longer than usual, no longer separated by unspoken walls. In that storm, our bond had also been tested and healed. I found the first USB in my desk drawer, the one that once held both my future and Mr. Williams' life. Now it was just a small plastic drive. But it had been a sword in the hands of the powerless. I kept it, as a symbol that truth, once held firm, cannot be extinguished. I received a letter from the U.S. Attorney's Office, thanking me for my exceptional contribution to the case. It wasn't fame, it wasn't glory. Just a quiet acknowledgement. But to me, it meant everything. It said, "You walked the right path, even when it tore at your feet." The Ripley Foundation began awarding its first scholarships to underprivileged, stigmatized students. During the ceremony, they read my original speech. The final line made the entire room fall silent. Sometimes, justice comes from where no one dares to believe. In a student, a teacher, a single act of courage. Schools across the district began conducting internal audits, uncovering more hidden misconduct. The dominoes weren't falling because of scandal. They were falling because people no longer wanted to stay silent. We didn't change the world, but we sparked a wave of awakening. I began college not as a former problem student, but as a young woman carrying a story that mattered. A story not just my own, but shared by hundreds of students who had been hurt by greed and silence. And I know, whatever lies ahead, I will never bow to injustice again. I end this journal with something Mr. Williams once told me, the morning he drove me to the SAT. You can choose to stay silent, or you can choose to rewrite the story. I chose to write. And I hope someday someone reading this will choose the same.